I'm calling it 2026 is the year of connection. We're all fried. We've had a diet of short form content, algorithmic everything, AI generated slop everywhere you look. And everyone's been consuming alone in their own little feed that's optimized for them specifically. And people, I think, are tired of it. That's what I'm hearing. They're really looking for something real, like actual conversation with actual people and having some kind of actual connection. And I think even our students are feeling this, maybe even more than we do, because they've grown up with the algorithm and they are feeling more of that isolation. And I think they're hungry for something different. So when I'm thinking about what I'm designing in my classroom right now, that's what I keep coming back to, not just to like get them talking and not just group work, but really thinking about how I can build interdependence and structures where they need each other and where their piece and their voice really matter. So that's what I'm working on this week. This is the Anti-Burnout PLC. I'm Danielle. Every week you show up, we work through something together, you leave with a plan, you bring your week, I bring mine, and we figure it out. So, if that's a goal for you too, like students actually connecting and actually accountable, we're going to walk through a structure I use a lot, and you can build one for whatever you're teaching right now. So, last week in PLC, we mapped discussion for the month. This week, we're going to zoom into one specific structure and look at small group with accountability. So, grab whatever you've got for this week. If we're making 2026 the year of connection in our classrooms, we have to think about how this happens because it doesn't just happen because we want it to, right? We have to design for it. I think about planning in terms of jobs. So, what's this actually for and what job is it doing? For students this week, I think the job is feeling needed, feeling necessary, not just like welcomed or included, but actually needed. Like if I didn't show up, the group couldn't do it, at least not in the same way. And my voice actually matters. My piece matters. Different from most group work in the way that I designed group work earlier in my career, where honestly one person can carry the whole thing and everyone else just exists nearby, you know? And then when it comes to me, you, I think honestly the job right now is slowing down a little because we just got back and there's this pull to jump right back on the hamster wheel. There are so many things that are going on right now, so many tasks on our to-do list. But I think what we need to keep thinking about is February because February is a high burnout month. It's coming, it's brutal, no breaks. That's the reason that there's, I think, that high burnout. So I'm trying to get organized and think about what I actually need in this unit, what I already have, and what's worth keeping. It feels like a luxury, I admit, like, who has time to think about what they need? But it's the kind of thing that pays off later. If I take the time now, then February would be easier, and that's what I think we should do too. That's what we're holding today. Students need to feel needed, and you need to slow down and just get situated before February hits. So, when we're thinking about our students, pull the sleeves up. So, the structure is individual to group to individual. This is the structure that I've found really works. And thinking about it as something that's repeatable has really helped me to put together these kinds of groups in a way that saves time and energy. So they come in with something that is theirs, something that they did the thinking, they have knowledge that's their own and individual and unique. And then there's group work. But the group work is actually a synthesis. So they're putting their pieces together and they're not just splitting up labor, they're combining what they each brought. And then the individual accountability at the end. So they're responsible for all of it, not just the piece that they brought. And I think that's what really makes it work. If you skip the first part, like if they come in empty, then that leaves more space open for someone else to do the thinking that they just copy. And if you skip the last part, if there isn't that individual accountability at the end, then they can just coast on the group. I think it's really the sandwich that creates that interdependence. So they need each other in the middle because they each came with something and they'll each be responsible for everything at the end. So you might have noticed the way that I'm thinking about this is it's almost like jigsaw esque. It doesn't have to have all of the components of a jigsaw. It doesn't need to be like days long. You don't need to make multiple different, you know, assignments for each student and then bring them together and make these complicated groupings. It's just in the design of the task, the group work specifically has to require synthesis and not assembly, because assembly is just putting those pieces next to each other. Like you did yours, I did mine, we staple them together, parallel work. Synthesis, they have to actually combine what they brought and transfer it into something new. All right, so here's what we're putting together here. When we're thinking about what we want to do for this week, we have our objectives, like maybe we have the text that we need to cover, and we know that we want to put some discussion design into it. I have come up with these 4 design keys that help us to think through what we need to make that interdependent kind of discussion. Because I think this is the hardest part, right? It's coming up with something that actually matters for a group to do and not just individually. So, 4 design keys. Design key number 1, and these are to help think through how to make that synthesis task. So design key number 1 is make the output singular. In this case, we're thinking not each person shares their answer, but they're really just coming up with one answer that accounts for all their pieces. So it could be one claim, one thesis, one ranking, one decision. And I think this means that it doesn't need to really be this like huge assignment that we're putting together. If we're like, bring your ideas, bring these questions that you answered, bring this reflection that you completed, and then we're just going to come up with one claim. Everybody bring what you had, and now we come up with one claim. It could even be like, bring your own quotes, and now we're going to come up with one claim. So it doesn't need to be something that's huge. Okay, one singular output. The second is ask across, not about. So, not what did you find, but what pattern do you see across what everyone found? So, here we're not going to say just share your evidence, but thinking about what claim you could make that includes all of the evidence. And that kind of goes back to what you could bring is just bring some evidence and think about making a singular claim. So, we can think about it in 2 ways. It could either be like come up with your best claim using some pieces, or make sure that you incorporate everything and you're going to think about what patterns you see. The third design key is forcing connection. So thinking about what all of these things have in common, how they relate to each other, and what would you argue if you had to account for all of these perspectives. So the design key 2 is looking at patterns that you see across the different whatever it is that they're bringing. And then the third design key is saying, okay, now you have to incorporate everything. It's not just look and see amongst everything what you see, but now connect everything together. And how could that work? The fourth is make disagreements productive. If they brought different answers, in synthesis, we wouldn't want them to just pick one. We would really want them to figure out why they're different or what larger truth holds all of them. So, thinking about not necessarily resolving their differences, but thinking about how they can live together and talking about how they are different and also how they're similar. The design of this task is actually thinking about the variations in the evidence itself or whatever it is that they're bringing. This can look different ways, right? We can have a true jigsaw where they learn different content in expert groups and then teach each other in mixed groups. Then everyone's assessed on all of it. But simpler, we can just say each answers a different question before class. They bring that to the group, they synthesize together, then they write individually. So it has that sandwich. Or even simpler, they can each reflect on something from the reading, share in small groups, build a claim together, and then everyone writes their own version. I just want to stress that it doesn't need to be some really involved task in order for it to build interdependence. And really, I also want to emphasize that all of these have the same structures, that you come with something, build together, and then own all of it. I'll give you an example of what I'm working on this week. So I'm teaching Keats right now. We watched Bright Star, and I'm going to have students look at Ode to a Nightingale and also Ode on a Grecian Urn. They'll start with a cold read of Nightingale. They'll do it individually. I'm going to give them some focus areas and they're going to take some annotations and just do some noticings. And then when they come to small groups, they'll have some specific questions to answer. But one of the tricks that I use is I say that only one person is allowed to write. So that forces that they actually have to work together. And then the writer has to listen to what everyone is bringing and they need to kind of figure it out together. So you can't just each write your own thing and then staple it together or even pass around the paper. It's only one person. And another hint, trick that I use is the person that is least likely to be involved, you could assign them to be the writer, and that helps them to kind of stay in the task. So then what they'll do in my classroom is apply the same types of questions to Grecian Urn individually. They're on their own and responsible for the full analysis, and they will have had to have learned what they went over as a group. So again, individual to individual, they come with something, they synthesize together, and then they own all of it. That's what I'm doing this week. What are you doing this week? When you're building your discussions for this week, just try thinking about the synthesis task first. I think that's the best place to start, and then the other parts fall into place better. Thinking about like the way that I approach this is I think what would they need to actually think together about and not just report about and then work backwards. So what do they need to come in with for that to work? And then forward, how is each person going to be responsible for all of this at the end? Again, like I said, that they're going to apply it to another task, but it could be even simpler. You could do a quick quizzes to just see like, did you get this? Were you paying attention? It could be an exit ticket. It doesn't need to be a big deal. If you're stuck on this synthesis task, remember those 4 design keys: make the output singular, ask a cross-nut about, force connection, and disagreement productive. All right, so that's the student side, what we're actually going to be delivering to the classroom. I said at the top that I think that one of the things that we need to do is try to really force slowing down this week. So that is where we think about the teacher job. That job for us is slowing down before February hits. And I admit trying to slow down is going to feel like a luxury, something that you can't afford, but it really is the kind of thing that pays off. It has a strong ROI, return on investment, spending time now to save time later. So here's what I'm thinking: open your drive and do an audit. So go into whatever you're teaching the next few weeks. And I would say if you've been teaching for a while, try to go back into some of your old assignments and your old planning and just see everything that you came up with related to what you're doing now. Look for anything that could become the guts of a synthesis task. And as you're doing that, keep track of what you see that might not be synthesis, but you could use in your unit. So for just thinking about discussion specifically, what you could find, it doesn't necessarily even need to be something that was a discussion. It could be a question you like that got students thinking. It could be strong background information you gave. Maybe different students could own different pieces of that. It could be a writing prompt, an analysis task, a close reading question. None of it has to have started as a discussion or group work. You're just looking for content. And when you find something, and this is the part that I have a lot of trouble with, but don't just leave it there, keep track of it somewhere. I would suggest personally doing this electronically, at least at some point. Well, if you're going through the drive, I would say just do it electronically because then you're able to keep track of the links to the document in addition to what the actual document is and what ideas you have for it. For each one you find, keep track of, I would just say make a table. What is it? Like a name and a quick description, a link to your Google Drive document, and then a potential use. So what unit, what text, what could it become? You're building a list, so when you sit down to plan a discussion, you're not starting from nothing. You're not starting from scratch. You're pulling from what you've already made. So, what I would recommend is really spend like 20 minutes now, and really that will save you hours later. Once you've done that, you can just identify where you have gaps, what you might turn it into, what work you need to do, but you're not starting from scratch, right? And it also almost like puts you back in the mindset of your unit, thinking about where you've been and where you want to be. So I think that kind of going back is really helpful. I found I've had years where what I did was I took from previous years without documenting what I was doing. So when I look back at that year, I'm like, what even happened here? So having some kind of breadcrumbs from yourself for yourself, I think is also really helpful so that you can go back next year and say, okay, here's where I was and what I was thinking. So then you can jump in a little bit faster. So your turn. Remember those four design keys again. Make the output singular, ask across, not about, force connection, and make disagreement productive. And then that structure of going from individual to group to individual. And my strong advice is to start with the synthesis task and then work backwards and forwards and do the audit. Like 20 minutes, build the list, and this will really get you situated, get you going for the week ahead because you'll have both the discussion structure that you want to use, not only for this week, but for the rest of the month. You'll go through your documents to see what you already have. So you'll have a plan for what you need to make. You'll also have a better idea of what you have. I know even for units that I have taught before, I don't necessarily have a strong idea of what I actually need. I end up designing a lot and then I go back and I'm like, I'm kind of treading a lot of the same ideas. And I really wish I would have gone back to understand what I had before. So spend that time, build the list, find the gaps, and then you're really well set up for this week and also going forward. So, next week, what we're going to talk about is the bigger discussions. We'll talk about Socratic seminars and fish bowls in whole class discussions. Also, I want to tell you the membership challenge for this month starts next week, this week coming up. If you are interested, this is going to be 5 days. We're building a writing unit with schema development in mind, again, using what you already have. You end with a unit that's actually sequenced for learning. I'll put a link in the description if that sounds good to you. So thanks for hanging out for PLC, and I'll see you next week.